A fool. A bass voice said distinctly somewhere, a voice not belonging to either of the Ivans and extremely like the bass of the consultant. Ivan, for some reason not offended by the word fool, but even pleasantly surprised at it, smiled and drowsily grew quiet. Sleep was stealing over Ivan, and he was already picturing a palm tree on its elephant's leg, and a cat passing by, not scary, but merry, and, in short, sleep was just about to come over Ivan, when the grill suddenly moved noiselessly aside, and a mysterious figure appeared on the balcony, hiding from the moonlight, and shook its finger at Ivan. Not frightened in the least, Ivan sat up in bed and saw that there was a man on the balcony. And this man, pressing a finger to his lips, whispered, SHH. Chapter 12. Black Magic and its Exposure. A small man in a yellow bowler hat full of holes and with a pear-shaped, raspberry-colored nose, in checkered trousers and patent leather shoes, rolled out onto the stage of the variety on an ordinary two-wheeled bicycle. To the sounds of a foxtrot he made a circle, and then gave a triumphant shout, which caused his bicycle to rear up. After riding around on the back wheel, the little man turned upside down, contrived while in motion to unscrew the front wheel and send it backstage, and then proceeded on his way with one wheel, turning the pedals with his hands. On a tall metal pole with a seat at the top and a single wheel, a plump blonde rolled out in tights and a little skirt strewn with silver stars, and began riding in a circle. As he met her, the little man uttered cries of greeting, doffing his bowler hat with his foot. Finally, a little 8-year-old with an elderly face came rolling out and began scooting about among the adults on a tiny two-wheeler furnished with an enormous automobile horn. After making several loops, the whole company, to the alarming drum beats of the orchestra, rolled to the very edge of the stage, and the spectators in the front rows gasped and drew back, because it seemed to the public that the whole trio with its vehicles was about to crash down into the orchestra pit. But the bicycles stopped just at the moment when the front wheels threatened to slide into the abyss on the heads of the musicians. With a loud shout of "Hop!" the cyclists jumped off their vehicles and bowed, the blonde woman blowing kisses to the public, and the little one tooting a funny signal on his horn. Applause shook the building, the light blue curtain came from both sides and covered the cyclists, the green exit lights by the doors went out, and in the web of trapezes under the cupola white spheres lit up like the sun. It was the intermission before the last part. The only man who was not the least bit interested in the wonders of the Joly family's cycling technique was Gregory Danilovich Rimsky. In complete solitude he sat in his office, biting his thin lips, a spasm passing over his face from time to time. To the extraordinary disappearance of Likodayev had now been added the wholly unforeseen disappearance of Varenyuka. Rimsky knew where he had gone, but he had gone and not come back. Rimsky shrugged his shoulders and whispered to himself. But what for? And it was strange, for such a practical man as the fine director, the simplest thing would, of course, have been to call the place where Varenyuka had gone and find out what had befallen him, yet until 10 o'clock at night he had been unable to force himself to do it. At 10, doing outright violence to himself, Rimsky picked up the receiver and here discovered that his telephone was dead. The messenger reported that the other telephones in the building were also out of order. This certainly unpleasant, though hardly supernatural, occurrence for some reason thoroughly shocked the fine director, but at the same time he was glad, the need to call fell away. Just as the red light over the fine director's head lit up and blinked, announcing the beginning of the intermission, a messenger came in and informed him of the foreign artiste's arrival. The fine director cringed for some reason, and, blacker than a storm cloud, went backstage to receive the visitor, since there was no one else to receive him. Under various pretexts, curious people kept peeking into the big dressing room from the corridor, where the signal bell was already ringing. Among them were conjurers in bright robes and turbans, a skater in a white knitted jacket, a storyteller pale with powder and the make-up man. The newly arrived celebrity struck everyone by his marvelously cut tailcoat, of a length never seen before, and by his having come in a black half mask. But most remarkable of all were the black magician's two companions, a long checkered one with a cracked pince-nez, and a fat black cat who came into the dressing room on his hind legs and quite nonchalantly sat on the sofa squinting at the bare makeup lights. Rimsky attempted to produce a smile on his face, which made it look sour and spiteful, and bowed to the silent black magician, who was seated on the sofa beside the cat. There was no handshake. Instead, the easygoing checkered one made his own introductions to the Fin director, calling himself the gent's assistant. This circumstance surprised the fine director, and unpleasantly so. There was decidedly no mention of any assistant in the contract. Quite stiffly and dryly, Gregory Danilovich inquired of this fallen from the sky checkered one where the artiste's paraphernalia was. Our heavenly diamond, most precious Mr. Director, the magician's assistant replied in a rattling voice, the paraphernalia is always with us. Here it is. Ein, Savai, dry. And, waving his knotty fingers before Rimsky's eyes, he suddenly took from behind the cat's ear Rimsky's own gold watch and chain, hitherto worn by the fine director in his waistcoat pocket, under his button coat, with the chain through a buttonhole. Rimsky inadvertently clutched his stomach, those present gasped, and the make-up man, peeking in the doorway, grunted approvingly. Your little watchy? Kindly take it, the checkered one said, smiling casually and offering the bewildered Rimsky his own property on a dirty palm. No getting on a tram with that one, the storyteller whispered quietly and merrily to the make-up man. But the cat pulled a neater trick than the number with the stolen watch. Getting up from the sofa unexpectedly, he walked on his hind legs to the dressing table, pulled the stopper out of the carafe with his front paw, poured water into a glass, drank it, installed the stopper in its place, and wiped his whiskers with a make-up cloth. Here no one even gasped, their mouths simply fell open, and the make-up man whispered admiringly. That's class. Just then the bells rang alarmingly for the third time, and everyone, agitated and anticipating an interesting number, thronged out of the dressing room. A moment later the spheres went out in the theater, the footlights blazed up, lending a reddish glow to the base of the curtain, and in the lighted gap of the curtain there appeared before the public a plump man, merry as a baby, with a clean-shaven face, in a rumpled tailcoat and none too fresh shirt. This was the master of ceremonies, well known to all Moscow, Georges Bengalski. And now, citizens, Bengalski began, smiling his baby smile, There is about to come before you here. Bengalski interrupted himself and spoke in a different tone. I see the audience has grown for the third part. We've got half the city here. I met a friend the other day and said to him, "Why don't you come to our show?" Yesterday we had half the city. And he says to me,